Welcome. Thank you so much for coming today. I'd like to offer the opportunity for Anna to share a few words and a welcome from Raven, and then I will do my share from Stop Ecocide Canada.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Anna Simeon. I am a settler of Croatian descent, so first generation Canadian, and I'm here because I work with Raven respecting Aboriginal values and environmental needs. And it is a great pleasure to be partnering with Stop Ecocide Canada on this webinar series. We had one earlier in the year that was so well attended and such incredible panelists. I'm really looking forward to this one. And it's especially exciting because Raven's mandate is quite defined. We support Indigenous nations in Canada in through fundraising for their legal challenges to get their rights and lands, rights enforced and lands back. So we have worked with Chief Dana Tizya-Tramm on the Peel campaign with his nation and two of the other nations that were involved in that, in protecting the Peel watershed. Currently, we are working with Sleydo and the Vuntut and hereditary chiefs on stopping Coastal GasLink. And but expanding the box to include international law. And in my personal history, Croatia went through a war, and the criminals from that war were tried and sentenced under international law for crimes against humanity and crimes against peace, war crimes, etc. And so it was really important to me personally to see that justice happen and something for the whole world. So how can we expand this box to include crimes against the earth, but also decolonize some of the assumptions that may be prevalent in the European understanding of international law? So that's super exciting to me. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you so much, Louise, for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. We're really thrilled to be partnering with Raven on this. So my name is Louise Romain. I'm International Grassroots Outreach for Stop Ecocide International, and I will be speaking as a panelist later. I'm logging in today from Stroud, which is at the convergence of 5 valleys in the Cotswolds, southwest England, and I'm originally French. And I would like to say a few words welcoming you on behalf of Stop Ecocide Canada. So we welcome you to our second webinar. So far, these webinars are focused on the adequacy of an international law criminalizing ecocide and exploring the real value for Indigenous rights and sovereignty. The Canadian National Campaign began only 7 months ago by Youth Environmental Award recipient and climate activist Jamie Hunter and longtime human rights and climate justice advocate Donna Grace Campbell. Together, they saw the need for Canada to summon courage and be the leader it could be. Canada sees itself as just and equitable society with a love for the rule of law. Many would disagree. But it's important to notice that in 1997, Canada took major steps toward justice. The country played a pivotal role in establishing the International Criminal Court, and it became the first country in the world to incorporate the obligation of the ICC's Rome Statute into its national laws. This paved the way for other countries to follow and provide the legal framework to criminalize and prosecute genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. So, moving this campaign forward, we are hoping that ecocide will become this 5th crime against peace in the Rome Statute. And on that note, I would like to introduce our moderator that some of you have met already in the past minutes. We are very, very excited and honored to have Suzanne Dhaliwal with us. She is an activist and campaigner working on Indigenous rights and mining issues since 2008. She has been connecting environmental justice struggles in the Arctic, tar sands, and Nigeria, specifically around Shell's human rights violations, and working in allyship with frontline Indigenous land defenders. She has spearheaded and led international divestment campaigns and steered the international insurance industry out of coal and tar sands. She is currently working as a creative consultant and lecturer focused on decolonizing climate justice, culture, and communications. Thank you, Suzanne.
Great. Thank you, Louise, and thank you for having me. I'm currently actually in Croatia. I'm in Korčula Island. I'm here actually due to Brexit. My partner's Polish, so we're seeing how already that legislation is impacting our lives. And I'm really grateful to be here today. As Louise mentioned, for the past decade plus, my work has been to be in allyship. I'm Sikh. I'm a Sikh British Canadian person of color, and so I see myself as, you know, having a role and responsibility to work in allyship with Indigenous communities, with my access to the British Crown and to those corporations to try and elevate and support. And I think throughout that work, what was very interesting was along the way, I met with many of the campaigners who have been working on Ecocide, most notably Polly Higgins. At one point when we were trying to stop Canada from undermining climate legislation in the EU, I was doing a lot of work there around trade talks, and that was where I actually met Polly, and she would give me tips where the trade talks were happening so I could shut them down. So I have really deep, fond memories of Polly. So I'm really humbled and really honored to hold space with you all today. And as I mentioned, as we were coming in with the virus happening and the pandemic, it's really vital that we have time to come together and to pause the brakes. Often when we're working in the climate emergency and around climate crisis, we can just be moving so fast. And I think it's really important that we take time to understand and decolonize and make sure that the strategies that we're implementing aren't recreating the same oppressions of colonization. So I'm really grateful to all of our panelists today for taking time out from your busy schedules to join us and to be in this exploratory conversation. So I'm just going to take some time now to introduce you all, and I'm going to give space for all of you to also introduce yourselves after I offer an introduction in your own language. So I'm going to start off with Molly. Molly Wickham is a fierce spokesperson for Gidimt'en Nation members and their allies who have been fighting the Coastal GasLink pipeline. She was among 14 people arrested in 2019 when heavily mounted armed Mounties enforced a BC Supreme Court injunction at the Gidimt'en point. After completing her master's degree in Indigenous governance at the University of Victoria, she moved home to Lutis-Bin territory with her family. She's passionate about governance, the health and well-being of the Yintha territories, and transmission of culture, language, and traditional song and dance. So hi, Molly, just gonna let you, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone. Great. Masai, Sai Sleydo, Sydney, Gidimt'en Hesley, Witsoten Isten, Stop Ecocide, Masai no Disney. My name is Sleydo. I hold the name in Cassia House, which is in the Gidimt'en clan of the Witsoten Nation. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Fela. And second, I'd like to introduce Chief Dana Tizya-Tramm, is the Vuntut Gwitchin First Nations lead voice on Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the caribou, porcupine caribou. The Gwitchin are once again facing down a threat to their way of life, as outgoing Donald Trump makes a late game effort to open the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil and gas exploration before he leaves office. These are the pristine calving grounds of the largest animal land migration on Earth. The survival of the porcupine caribou is linked to the survival of Chief Dana's nation, its culture and identity. So thank you for being here, and I just want to pass it over to you if you'd like to introduce yourself too.
Dren Plan Gwinzi Shalaknai, Bajri Dana Tija Oji, Chitnali Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation, Kegwadak Nakwa Vili. Good day, all of my relations. My name is Dana Tizya-Tramm, and I am the chief of the Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation. And may Kegwada creator be with us here today. Let's see.
Thank you so much. And last, but certainly not least, of our panelists from our guests is Melissa Mollen Dupuis, is a member of the Innu community of Vuntut on Quebec's Côte Nord. In 2012, she created with Widia Lavere the Quebec branch of the I Don't Know More movement. Apologies for my pronunciation. Deepest apologies. In 2014, Melissa became president of the Wapikonis Board of Administrators, and in 2017, Amnesty International named her Ambassador of Conscience, along with 5 other figures of Canada's First Peoples movement. In 2018, she became the Boreal campaigner for the David Suzuki Foundation. Thank you, welcome.
I would just want to say thank you very much. I know I rather people try to say it in language. Equentit is not always easy to say. And I will also ask for forgiveness today because my first colonial language is French. So sometimes I will be looking myself for my words. So no judgment today.
Thank you. Also, I'm going to use the excuse that it's 1 a.m. So great, thank you. And I also would like to introduce our co-host this evening as well, as International Grassroots Outreach for Stop Ecocide. Louise coordinates multiple national teams and develops strategies while upholding the local knowledge and expertise of volunteers on the ground. She is passionate about weaving networks of solidarity across lands and oceans. She believes tremendous change lies in the merged advocacy of Indigenous rights, women leadership, and climate justice. She trained as a techno-anthropologist in Copenhagen, where she concluded a 3-year-long research project, Circular Voices, a digital journey on cultural revitalization among Quebec First Nations. So, hi Louise.
Merci, bienvenue à tous et à toutes. Et merci de votre présence aujourd'hui. Je me sens vraiment honorée de faire partie de cet événement et de représenter la campagne Stop Ecocide. Thank you so much, everyone, for showing up today. I also want to thank all the beings that enabled your presence. Obviously, all the digital beings that connect us in this virtual space together, but also your human and more than human ancestors, all the allies we have across the different species. And yeah, I think the lands we fight for and that we defend. So bringing all of these places and this inspiration for us tonight. Thank you so much. Merci.
Great. So today, yes, we wanted to really go a little bit deeper with you all around some of the philosophy and values of Ecocide and to hear your perspectives on that. So I just want to give you a little bit of a definition that, you know, Ecocide is the missing crime of our times, as it could protect ecosystems and multi-species existence. It is essential to have one specific word to describe what is happening, and that is the mass destruction of nature that often goes unpunished, as we've seen with the BP disaster and many of the disasters across the globe. Even when companies are sued or call for compensation, those amounts amount to nothing for corporations such as them. So the vision of the international campaign to make Ecocide an international crime is to really shift the current paradigm under which corporate leaders, insurers, and banks are legally permitted to plunder the earth for financial gain, whereas land defenders and water protectors are being criminalized for standing up and protecting life in the current paradigm. So we wanted to start today's conversation by asking you, how does the word ecocide land with you? And is there an equivalent in your Indigenous language? So we're just going to kick off with that question. I'm going to pass it to Melissa. Do you want to kick us off? Just because you've got the great turtle.
I always hate starting first because I talk a lot, and it's not by disrespect to my colleagues, but don't hesitate to cut me if you need, okay, please. In Innu, I couldn't say if there's ecocide, but one thing is certain that I've seen the disconnect, and for Indigenous communities and for non-Indigenous communities, that brings forward that facilitation of ecocide. People don't like the word. It's like when we talk about genocide and cultural genocide. I think we remember with the Truth and Reconciliation process, a lot of people reacted when we were talking about the genocide. And in French, I can tell you it's all another set of words that could be used because they don't have the same weight, even if you translate it to the same. So the fact is that the decision of acting or not acting is bringing forward problematics for communities. And I see right now in Quebec, just in Quebec, for example, the clear disappearance of the caribou, which is that being that is central to my own culture and to other culture across Turtle Island. But for a lot of people, they see it as a very sad happening. But for me, it's very much a loss of food security, of language, of culture, of capacity and connection to the land. Why would we go on the land if we don't need to access it because we don't have that relation now anymore? So trying to tell people the word ecocide when we accept that any kind of loss of relation is the death of the human being is very hard, because for a lot of non-Indigenous people in the French or English language, you need to have somebody stabbing directly something with a knife or killing it with a gun to say the word. But disconnected relations that bring that same situation are not seen as ecocide or as genocides, or, so often that disconnect of relation permits this situation to happen, and people will often go like, well, what can we do? A lot, a lot can be done. A lot of self, I would say self, like turning the mirror towards ourselves to see what we are doing and what we are not doing. So right now, it's been a couple of years I've not eaten caribou. And it's kind of strange. If I would to be telling somebody from Quebec or Canada, you cannot eat bread anymore. Just the idea, and I'm not talking about like non-gluten and stuff like that. I mean, just the basic food of life, that basic thing that's been in your history for so long, that's been available because you have created a equilibrium in the relation where you give back that security to the animal and the animal gives you food security. People would say, well, you don't need to go get the caribou. You have the beef, you have this, and you have that. And they will normalize that loss of security. And I think that's something that I see a lot happening in the communities, because we have frozen pizza and we have steaks, and a lot of things are replacing that relation like a crutch. So for me, I see that as an ecocide, but because nobody is suffering or nobody is seeing the action of destroying that relation or destroying the animal or destroying the territory, people do not want to acknowledge it in that way. They find that they need something like a visual to recognize this. So for me, it's really the equivalent I would find in French or English is really that disconnection with nature, with your relations. And it is dangerous. And we're seeing it with COVID, that these systems have been put in place can crumble any day. And then what do we have left on the territory? So I think that's why it's really hard to talk about these words when we're starting from 2 or 3 different languages and trying to connect with ideas, and your ideas from your nation are often not the one regarded. We have to start talking from the basis of the colonizer, and then it's all storytelling that's not been taught to the person you're talking with. So we are teachers, we are protectors, it's a lot of job. And then we have to convince them that there's an ongoing situation that we need to work around.
Thank you. Thank you for starting us off. Such a beautiful truth and reality to the conversation about how difficult to even talk about the trauma of the land is from our different positionalities. So thank you so much for kicking us off with that insight. I'd like to pass on to Molly now.
Thank you. Yeah, I asked a couple of our Tsakaize, our matriarchs and women chiefs, about the word ecocide and what it means and what that might mean in our language. And both of the matriarchs that I talked to are fluent language speakers. I'm not a fluent language speaker, and they couldn't readily come up with a definition of what that would be like. And it's because our laws would not allow for ecocide to happen. So we didn't have a term in our language that would describe ecocide, because our whole governance system, our whole body of laws is built to protect the land. It all comes from the land. Our Anaknuiten, our laws are derived from our relationship to the land and our dependence on the land. And so I really agree with Melissa when she was talking about how we are dependent on the land and our relationship is so deep with the land, that to me, the term ecocide is really similar to genocide, because it's not only destroying the our enjoyment and the animals and the other life beings enjoyment of a territory, but it's about our dependency, our interdependence on each other, and the way that we rely on one another for life to be sustainable. So it's really it's more similar to me to genocide, because we are the land and the land is us, is what we've talked about and what has been passed on to us from our elders, because we literally take in everything from the land. And so when that's destroyed and when that's poisoned and we can no longer take those things in, then we start to die, we start to get sick. And we see that in our people being with the rates of cancer, with the rates of diabetes, with the rates of all of the other diseases, because our relationship with the land is not in balance, and our lands are being destroyed and poisoned, and that's killing us. And so I find a very strong connection to the term, genocide and our dependence on the land, rather than ecocide. But obviously I think that it makes sense to have that definition and to have a clear definition of what that actually means. And I think that for all human beings, that is so central to life, that it's not like, I feel like it's more than just this enjoyment by animals on the land and the ecosystem. It's more than just an enjoyment. It's sustainability of life itself. And so I find it really closely linked to genocide.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that insight, and thank you for bringing back that perspective from the matriarchs that, even the imagination or the paradigm of the law that you're talking about is so ingrained in nurturing and protection that even to have this law is a completely different paradigm. And also and thank you for emphasizing as well the relationship between people and the environment, and how for campaigners often that disconnection is there, and it's implicit in the word of ecocide. So thank you for bringing those things back into relationship. And I want to pass now to Chief Dana for your thoughts and reflections as well. Thank you for waiting.
Oh, no problem. As a man in a matriarchal society, I'm used to going last, so it's my honor to be last. So I really appreciate what was put before, because honestly, as modernizing First Nation, for instance, in our language, which is Gwitchin, which is one of the most difficult languages to learn in Canada, we're coming up to some issues modernizing it. For instance, we don't have a north, east, southwest in our language. Directions go by river flows. So you have to know our areas and the way that rivers flow to know what we're talking about when we're speaking this way. So ecocide is a bit of a new concept that I have not been able to find in our histories or some of our language speakers. They said, though, that they will look into this. And I think this is something I would like to kind of address in our language, because they spoke of a time when our people were over 10,000 strong in a specific area and we began to overhunt animals. So they were going to look to that time in our history, and we reorganized ourselves. But there are two ones that I can kind of try to amalgamate, which is one is Gwitchin, which means burnt. That could possibly be used. Or there's also Chikuyu, which is bloodsucker of the land, which could possibly be used in that sense. But moreover, I see some of the laughing, I really enjoy that. But moreover, there's an antecedent to this, and more powerful, I think, is a larger maxim, which in Gwitchin we have a principle of the universe. In our language we call Ne'inli, which is, you can liken to the salmon, Slukcho, who come from the oceans and they spawn in the riverbeds to die. And from their death comes new life. And that's Ne'inli, which is like a Gwitchin thermodynamics. The entire universe runs this way. So I think that to say is, if we as Gwitchin, as people, if we decide to destroy this earth, Ne'inli, new life will come from our destruction. So really our choice is whether we want to continue here with our mother or not. Masi.
Thank you. Thank you for those powerful words. And when you were speaking there, it really reminded me of my experience of walking through the tar sands in Alberta. Literally that the life being sucked out of the earth, literally the fire there. So definitely the experience of ecocide definitely comes to mind there. And I wanted to sort of, go a little bit deeper with this with you. You're all on some of the front lines of defending and protecting Mother Earth. And I wanted to hear a little bit about, what is that experience for you of witnessing this ecocide, this devastation to the land, and what do you think are some of the psycho-spiritual impacts of that, as well as letting our folks who have joined us know a little bit about the struggle that you're in. So if you want to kick up first, Melissa.
So thank you, Chief Dano, because when you said bloodsucker of the earth, I laughed because I was like, we have stories. I think that's the one thing that I really love when we have these meetings between Indigenous communities, is that we can compare stories and they complete each other. And you just made me thought of, I'm pretty sure you have that also. We call it the Achen, or some people call it the Wendigo, or it's the state of becoming a cannibal monster, because we didn't have hell or heaven before the Christians came in. The situation was always brought to yourself by your own action. And Achen or Wendigo is a state that you become a cannibal monster, and they say it happens to people who have done that unthinkable thing of eating human flesh, because that was the one big thing. And that would happen to some people when they would either eat their children. That's the storytelling of the one thing that the worst thing you could do is eat your children because you were so hungry. And like the salmon, you should be accepting the end of your cycle as something natural. And when you eat your children, you're going over the natural cycle and you become something that's not natural. And I've used this story in some economical forums where I told people we're Achen, we're cannibal monsters, because right now we are eating the future of our children by eating the resources. And so we're taking away from them their own life cycle, because we're trying to take more time for ourselves and not accept that we have a limit in what we can consummate as human beings. So I think that's one thing when I try to talk about ecocide and try to say how we are responsible, and how even I have that action complex every time I go eat at the fast food store, you know, when I take too much of what I don't need, I'm in that cycle. So that story is always in my mind, and it slows me down from wanting always more, or, you know, not respecting that life cycle. And it as a story brought better things into my life. So as an example, when we were all confined, and I think, you know, in Quebec, we have to stay inside after 8 p.m. And I'm sorry, I don't know if you hear them, but these are my children, my mini Achans. And we are, we seen what was the first reflex of people was to go and buy stuff on Amazon. And people were buying stuff because they were like so hungry for anything. And at one point, when your credit card is maxed out, what is the first thing you turn around to? It's nature. So people starting to be more in nature, to reconnect and see that simpler relations and less consuming was something that was healthier for their mind. And I've seen a lot of people in my community go back to walking and to putting down snares, and every day with the children, they go outside. And I've seen how that reconnected in a more healthier relation and a healthier way of consuming every day. And I've seen how all the entire economy of North America is built around that action complex. So I think that, and that's what's promoted as the good thing. You want to have 2 cars, you want to have a swimming pool, you want to have a big house, and you want to be a millionaire, and you want to be an Instagram star, and you want to, you know, always more, and it's never enough. Like the action is always hungry. That's his it's fate in the storytelling. He's never content, and that's why he's always eating and eating and eating, and it's kind of his own hell that he created by not respecting that equilibrium between what he really needs and what he thinks he needs. So I think that's something that's really hard to bring forward when everything in the economy and politics and everything brings you to be that 1%. And if you're not that 1%, you've been a failure. As for us, and I always use that ideology, I said when the 1% is always sustained by 99%. I said in Indigenous communities and leadership, you flip that pyramid and the 1% becomes the canoe that supports the 99%. And it's always hard to be a chief or a matriarch in a community, because nobody really likes where you go with the canoe. Everybody say, oh, you're not paddling fast enough. No, it's I would say, it's a really hard job to be a traditional leader, but you take that responsibility, and that makes you take less and give more. So that's why we need to flip also this idea of what is success and what is failure in North American mindsets.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those paradigm shifts, for the images, for the stories. You really made me think about many of the CEOs that I've encountered in this time, and, you know, the heads of Shell. And if we think about it, the existing law paradigm, what they're doing is actually legal. You know, they are by law mandated to return dividends to their shareholders. So that's the thing we're talking about here, is this paradigm shift for sure. So I'm going to pass over to Molly now.
Yeah, so in our territory, we live out right now, I'm about 2 hours out of the nearest town, and we live out on our Yinta, which is our territory. And a lot of the clans have started to, within our nation, have started to reoccupy our territories. And so we have 3 different clans, like Samisu, Unisdoten, and Gidimt'en, that are reoccupying land in our Yinta. And so we are seeing firsthand, we are seeing the ecocide happen firsthand on a daily basis in our territory. We have Coastal GasLink building their fracked gas pipeline to go to the coast to ship fracked gas, liquefied natural gas over across the seas to Asian markets. And we're seeing like an influx of workers. So, and just to give you an idea of what's happening on the Yinta, there's hundreds of workers out every single day There's man camps. There's 3 man camps that will house up to 1,000 people, 1,000 workers, foreign workers in each man camp, and there's 3 in our territory. So we have upwards of 200 to 300 workers all over our territory with RCMP, private security companies surveilling and harassing our people on a daily basis. So we can't actually go out and access our territories anymore without fear of being arrested. We held a ceremony on February 14th for our murdered and missing Indigenous women along the Highway of Tears. And I was threatened with arrest several times. I'm threatened with arrest on a daily basis when I'm out on the territory because they're afraid of any sort of resistance to this project. And so we've seen, since the project has started and since the injunction came into place, all of this work and the destruction happening along the right-of-way, just bulldozing through wetlands, drilling, geotechnical drilling underneath Wickham, our last clean drinking water. All of us that live out on the Yinta, we drink directly from that river. We get our water from the river. That's the water that our children drink. It needs to be healthy. It's the headwaters for all of our spawning salmon, all of the nations down to the coast, downwater from us. This is the headwaters that we're talking about. So we're actually seeing the destruction of our territories in real time with our own eyes on a daily basis. And it's really, really challenging for us, and it's really challenging on a micro level because our roles are being stripped away from us. Our roles as medicine gatherers, as storytellers, as hunters, as warriors, those roles are all being taken away because of what's happening on our territory right now. We didn't get, we rely heavily on accessing the territory because we still have the ability to go out and get our food. We don't go to the store and buy meat. We eat our moose meat and our beaver and our deer and our mountain goats and our salmon, everything. But that's being taken away. So every day that we went out to go hunting, we were criminalized and threatened with arrest for hunting on our own territory. All of the moose have disappeared. Last year on January 4th, the hereditary chiefs served an eviction notice to Coastal GasLink and shut down the territory. They shut down Gidimt'en from 39 kilometer at the edge of our territory. And within weeks, the animals started coming back again. The moose started coming back into the territory. We saw wolverines and deer and, everything started coming back. But when this, and this pipeline hasn't even been built yet. It hasn't even been built yet. This is just the ramp up to the work that's going to keep increasing and keep increasing. But they will destroy our drinking water forever. We will never be able to drink the water again if they drill underneath Wickham, which is our headwaters, our sacred river. And so it tells us, and it tells our community, that we don't matter, that Indigenous people don't matter, our way of life doesn't matter, our land is fundamental to our identity. We all know, there's been so many research studies, that our identity is like the core thing that keeps us healthy psychologically, spiritually, our practices that we can't practice anymore on our territory. It tells us that money is more important than Indigenous lives, than Wet'suwet'en lives. Why are our people killing ourselves? Why are our young people killing themselves? Because they don't have these roles anymore. We can see them being stripped away, like in real time, on our territory on a day-to-day basis. But on a macro level, these roles are being stripped away. Our purpose in life according to our culture. We can't have culture and language and songs and dances. Those are all representations of our relationship to our land. And so when that is being destroyed, we are being destroyed. We can't have we know that culture saves lives, but what is culture without land? We just can't do it. it's so hard, and people are trying, and people are doing everything that they can to try to make it work anyway, and to try to maintain that connection, but we are dying a slow death because we don't have that land base and we don't have that connection. And that's where all of our art form comes from. That's where our songs come from. That's where our legends come from, is the land. And so if we don't have that, our people will just continue to die. And it's very stressful being out on the territory in this kind of situation. It's really hard emotionally, spiritually. We have to be really spiritually well. There's so much that's happening on a day-to-day basis. There's so many people that are there to hurt the land, and they're there to hurt us and to take us off our land and throw us in jail. And so that's, the impacts that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis in our territory. And then, of course, the larger impacts are this, enemy, this cultural, genocide, and not even just cultural genocide, it's just pure genocide that is just killing our people because we can't eat our traditional foods. And, Melissa, it, really hit home when you said that you hadn't eaten caribou for 3 years. We used to have caribou. Wet'suwet'en people used to rely on caribou as a staple food along with our salmon, and we don't have caribou at all anymore because of industry, because they dammed. They put in a huge dam in my grandfather's territory and flooded out the caribou migration path. And I just tasted caribou for the first time in my life because an Eastern relative brought me some this fall. One of our Indigenous youth brought me some to try, but I had never tasted it. My children had never tasted it. My mother had never tasted it. And so that is, that impacts us on a really deep, fundamental level to not have those things and not be able to access those things. Outside.
Thank you. I really appreciate you for sharing with the depth and the descriptions. And I think it really supports us, because often when people are coming into this work, we can talk about some future scenario 5 years from now, some long distant future, but it's really important to understand that this is already the lived reality, the daily struggles that are continuing. And I see some people in the chat have been talking about how to offer support. We'll send you some links about that, how you can support folks already on the front lines, how you can work in allyship and solidarity. And I think the other important thing there is to mention that it's really important to trace it back to those companies, to the corporations who are responsible for those projects, because that's where we also need to put the accountability as well. So thank you so much. And we will be sharing some links where you can continue to support. I'm going to pass over to you now, Chief Dana. Thanks again for your patience.
I just want to start off by giving strength and acknowledging Shi'iji's, my sisters here. That was very difficult for me to hear, and I'll explain why. Speaking about the front lines, I never had any designs on getting into council and our leadership. I was working on my own projects, creating no trace ecotourism, leadership, cultural revitalization courses. I designed and implemented organizations to bring Indigenous youth on their traditional territories in the Peel watershed, and teaching them how to become guides with no trace ecotourism, which is my opportunity to give my heartfelt respects to Raven Trust for assisting the Trondek, Gidimt'en, and Vuntut Gwitchin First Nations in successfully winning a Supreme Court case. And what had happened here was we have now, with Raven Trust, have protected 64,000 square kilometers, possibly the second largest contiguous boundary protected land in the world, only second to Antarctica. And this is about the size of New Brunswick. It's larger than France, and Canada doesn't even know about this. And this is what we did together for all of Canadians. These are a number of different watersheds, breathtaking, pristine, untouched lands, not even a road in these areas. So when I got onto council, my portfolio was natural resources, and the Peel watershed had already taken place. And a long story short, we had the Yukon Party, a conservative party in the territorial government, that said, hey, you know, let's talk about industrial development in this area. And they said, we're going to consult with you. So about 7 years, the Indigenous people spent millions of dollars, and we put forward this plan, and we said, okay, this is what we see. And we knew we couldn't get 100% protection of the land. So we went with about 80% protection. And there are different levels through land use planning here in one of the most highly populated modern treaty or self-governing First Nation jurisdictions in Canada. 11 out of 14 First Nations in the Yukon have a modern treaty with the Crown. So the Yukon government of the day effectively took this, threw it in the garbage, and put their plan on the table, said, all right, 80% development, we consulted you. And we said, no, that is not consultation. So we went through the court systems, and eventually, I'll never forget being there in the Supreme Court when Canadian and Yukon lawyers came up, and the justices of the court actually dismissed them halfway through their talk. They said, okay, you're done. And people in the crowd were actually laughing, because that's how weak the arguments were being on behalf of every Canadian in this country. You were paying for a lawyer to try to usurp the pre-existing inherent right of Indigenous peoples to arbitrarily develop their lands. So that was many years and a lot of late nights dedicated to that. And right in the middle of this, right when we were coming close to satisfying this in the courts, as I was facing to the east in the Northwest Territories to the Peel watershed, behind me to the west, Donald Trump came into office and unilaterally, through a budgetary bill, which is circumventing regular democratic process, put in and stipulated in a statute that they were to mandate oil and gas development in a wildlife refuge in the United States. First time this has ever been done in its history. And it specifically went to the Alaska National Interest Land Conservation Act designation in section 1002, which is just over 1 million acres, 1.2 million acres, which is known to the Gwitchin as Gidimt'en, the sacred place where life begins. This is the largest land animal migration left on Earth, which is the porcupine caribou herd, which are running over 220,000 strong, these animals. So to hear my sister speak about not being able to eat caribou is very difficult, because our children draw pictures of their caribou camps in crayons. My niece grew up drinking caribou broth, and it was Vatsai, our brother caribou. And just to explain to our viewers, our stories, we remember our stories from 30,000 years ago when we first came to this land. And our people tell us about when we observed our brother Vatsai, and we followed our brother across this land to these calving grounds, and you know, the calving grounds in which the US was going to mandate development. And we followed them to this area, and it is said among our people that it was there that we entered these lands, which are sacred to our people. And we sat down with our brother caribou, and we made a treaty. We exchanged half of our heart with one another. This is how connected we are with caribou. And we exchanged half of our heart so that we would always be there together. We would always be connected, and we would always be there to look after one another. So as a young man, to have to face one of the largest governments in the world and have representatives like Don Young call me a liar in media. I mean, as a young man, I thought, you know, at least in leadership, things would be somewhat fair and amiable, but it was the US went right for the jugular, right for the weak points. They would not consult us. They broke their own laws to do this. And you know, what was so hard for me to fathom, and what I really struggled with when I was speaking with Congress or senators, was, look, there's far more underneath the surface of this land than oil. There's the future of my people. And what's really hard for our non-Indigenous and basically the colonial context, which is born from the early inklings of mechanical philosophies, born through the DNA of Descartes, Galileo, Sir Isaac Newton, which really tried to argue that the universe is a machine. It's all mechanics, right? There's no spirit to any of this. And, you know, in some of the academic writings, they even speak about this mechanical philosophy to take over and destroy the spiritual and the mystical. This is also known in some academic circles as suppression of the feminine, as a very male form of thought, and exacting over quantification, which is hijacked by Adam Smith in Wealth of Nations to deliver us today in a world that is what can be known as capitalistic totalitarianism, when unlocalized, unsovereign international corporations can influence that which is unalienable to us. So all of this to say is that frontline was a slow attrition and an affront to my very being and heart. But in becoming a medicine to the poisons of this world, instead of allowing them to usurp my own sovereignty, I would not give them that power. So to become that anecdote, I will never forget going into the representative for Arizona. And here I am trying to speak about Gidimt'en, Gwitchin, and the caribou. And, you know, I'm nervous. I'm going in to speak to this Congress, and here is their energy staffer, a young man, couldn't be more over 23, in a nice suit. And I looked at this guy, and it dawned on me, this guy probably hasn't even been camping. How am I going to explain the intrinsic nature and there's being no borders between us and Indigenous peoples, our lands, or as caretakers of the lands and the animals? So what I ended up in that moment realizing in a way that I could explain it to him is I sat down with him and I told him, look, if you are going to develop these federal lands for oil, and if you are willing to disrupt a 2 million year old species, you're actually going to be selling the infinite for the finite, because the flora of this area very deftly convert photons into nutrients through their chloroplasts, which are anchored into the flesh of the caribou, who deliver them in an ebb and flow across the Gwitchin Nation from Northeast Alaska into the Yukon and NWT and back. And it's so the beautiful juxtaposition of such a fragile environment as the northeastern coastal plain of Alaska, where there are still tire marks from the 80s, for this fragile area to actually be a wellspring of life. It is the beating heart of the Arctic. And as would you accept someone arbitrarily doing heart surgery on you for cosmetic effects? You don't do those kinds of things. This is already a renewable, self-sustaining energy system. And you can't tell me that for 10 years of oil, you're going to make the argument that this is for energy security. Because if you destroy this herd, then I'd like you to explain to me how you're going to pay and deal with diabetes, how you're going to fly unnutritious food to my communities, deal with the federal burden of our health and our mental health, cultural revitalization. You know, it's a complete misnomer. And the centralized ethos of this totalitarian capitalism is actually taking power away from us and even our rights, but as Indigenous peoples. You know what? It should be the exact opposite, because if you want to look at the future of this world, look at the Indigenous communities, because it is here we are taking advanced technologies and weaving them with sustainable principles. If we want to make some real headway towards the Paris Accord, and if we really want to practice what we preach as nations, then put Indigenous peoples at the legislative tables, at the economic tables, and never mind putting this burden of colonialism on us, but let's change this conversation and let's help indigenize and bring balance to your systems.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's like, woo. Thanks for bringing it full circle for us. Thank you for bringing the cosmic totality back into this, the metaphysics. This is a, complete conflict of metaphysics that we're talking about realities as well. So I really want to thank you for bringing all of that insight into this, and also to bringing it to a planetary international perspective as well. You mentioned the Paris Accord there, and we all know at this point there are not in the Indigenous rights, the human rights embedded in that we need to get to the future. So we really need to be tabling new proposals and new possibilities. And so the last thing that I wanted to bring to you all is, when we're thinking about tabling an international criminal law to protect the earth and further halt systemic and destructive activities, what do you think about that proposal to have an international law? And also, do you think that a crime of ecocide can uplift Indigenous laws and reinforce your own struggles and ambitions of Indigenous sovereignty? So those are some of the questions I'd like to bring to you. Melissa? You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. You got some big questions. I'm really happy to hear from my sister and brother from all across Turtle Island. I really love this image because this is really showing what we're trying to bring forward when another system has been superimposed on it. People have, with laws, rights, structure, government, everything has been created in a way that people think it's truth or reality. So when I talk about Turtle Island, and then I talk about, for example, brothers from, let's say, Standing Rock. Well, why are you talking about that? It's not in Quebec. Or when we were in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en people from Montreal. Why are you like, it's not even, it's at the other way of the ocean. I'm like, this is a living being. And we're trying to protect a living being. And we did not create the lines, the imaginary lines that have been put there. And that's been taught almost like it's a natural reality that the United States and Canada, they're separate, and Mexico, and it's like we have to bring back this as the concept of whatever is being done on this turtle is being done to the turtle. That if I lose an arm, the turtle is losing an arm. It's connected with my own arm. So like I love to say, Quebec, it's this arm, and we have on this turtle, everything that's being done touches me, even if I'm in Quebec, And when I went to the tar sand and I saw that big gaping hole, it was like incredible. I said, it's basically where the heart of the turtle is. And there was an elder that sadly passed away, but he made it as clear as it could be in my mind, where he was explaining, every time we pump the oil, it's like we're pumping the blood of the turtle. Every time we're going for minerals, it's like we're breaking its bone and we're taking its marrow. And when we do the tar sand, it's like we're scraping its skin for its oil. For thousands of years, humans have been doing, small living on the turtle, and have been able to be on this turtle like good bacteria on our own body. And we've been like gracefully helping it, because that's the thing. We've been part of this turtle in the same relation that a good bacteria on our body is helping us. But in the last 500 years, like a cancer cell, we've forgotten what was our responsibility and what was our relation living on that turtle. So now we're eating our host, and we're killing our host. That this is a living host, and like any living being, the life is on the surface. When we take all this life off, it's going to be rock, and it's going to be empty, and maybe then it'll get rid of us before it dies, So that's the thing. Where right now we're fighting for the survival of one species that's been making this turtle sick. So why I'm saying this is that we have to learn to fight with laws and with rights, and we have to take roles that are traditionally not ours. And we have that same contract you were explaining with caribou. We have Papakasik, which is the spiritual master of the caribou. And one thing that is clear is it's not us that are hunting the caribou. It's Papakasik that is giving us it's children, because we signed a contract, like not a contract, like literally, we signed a moral contract with caribou, as we will always respect it, and in exchange, it will give itself to us, and by that respect, it will be reborn, because that cycle is going to be respected. But now caribou is disappearing, and I think it's because there's that non-respect of the contract. And it's not so much on the indigenous part, but mostly like the people that are sharing the turtle with us. So right now, we are gaining a double responsibility of not only staying in that equilibrium we have created, but also enforcing that equilibrium on non-indigenous people. As we know, we got recognized we're on unceded land, on a territory. We're recognizing that this nation has better knowledge of anything or any relation that's on this territory. And so we use that knowledge as guides for our own living. So right now we have not made that knowledge respected on the level it should be. And since it's not been a balanced relation, it's been a colonizer relation. We've been using the colonizer tool. But the thing is, it has its limit. Like, I'm very sorry, I forgot the author, that's Audre Lorde said, you cannot undo the master house with the master tool, but you can make a big dent in it. And you can start having, after that, a better knowledge how to bring your own knowledge forward. And I'm thinking of the Wet'suwet'en that has permitted last year to get a better knowledge of how indigenous traditional leaderships have been put aside, but they have not disappeared. And often that discussion has never been put forward with non-indigenous people. And now it has. In Montreal, that discussion has been ongoing, because people are like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that there was still traditional chief or matriarch. And I didn't know that every territory has its own system that's been put in place. So right now people are learning more and more to recognize and to see that these structures are not void of power and of responsibilities and of taking forward the message. And I want to finish with that, because this is often something hard, because as we teach them, some people in the system learn as well. Mm-hmm. So right now in Quebec, there's an immense issue on what we call race shifter, because they've been taking identity in many aspects. And I'm not talking about people that want to recognize their ancestors that's been erased from their genealogical trees, or that they want to respect their backgrounds. I'm talking about those that want to have the Indian card and that want to have campsites on indigenous lands, but they're not connected to their community, as we are. Every time we build something, it's in regard of the community. So this is very hard, because we're being attacked on many fronts, and we have to teach, and then people adapt and they learn to use our rights against us. And then there's infighting, because people are, but we can't use this system because it's colonial, but the colonial system is using our own system against us. So because I've heard like people saying, well, what's your community? I don't have community, but I have my card. Well, you're not connected. So, and you're racist. Also, you're colonized because you're using the system to tell me I'm not part of the system. So this discussion is very hard, because we're also having this discussion around these systems, this settler system. And we have to, how to say, like take that ball of yarn and undo it as we're going with the fight. And so often I've found that the use of the system can only be good for us if our allies help us support our own fight, and we don't get overwhelmed by everybody around that really wants a part of the territory. And it's very hard to have this discussion, because it's still going outside of our own terms, but our terms are coming forward. Our teachings are coming forward, and there's more and more recognition on how this is not being done just for Indigenous people. It's being done for people. It's for the good of every people. As I always say, it's like, we're not going to put you back on the boat and like go across the ocean and go back. The relation, even if it's been crooked, it's been built. And now how do we repair it? But it's still fighting against that system, and it's very hard. And so ecocide, but in an Indigenous understanding, is very important. If we just use that term ecocide, but we want to do it in the settler understanding, then we're losing our own battles, because we're just, using the master's tool. So I think that's what I've heard also with Chief Dana. It's like, it's hard because my traditional chief is also my band council chief. So he's using all the tools he can to defend the territory. And it's hard to separate, because that power that's going over the communities is very strong, and it's eating up the energy of the people. And we have had so many issues in Quebec right now. We're talking about Joyce Echaquan that died in a live stream because of systemic racism. So some of our environmental youth that are fighting against this are also fighting against systemic racism, and then the wave of suicides, and then the COVID. And so even our communities are very tired of all this fighting on so many issues. And there are so many people that want a piece of something from our communities on many levels, and that want to see those titles disappear. So that's why I've been in environment right now. It's because without the territory, those rights, this culture we have is going to disappear slowly. So I think that's why that territory is so central. But without the people, without taking care of the people, there's no more people on the land to fight for it. And there's no need to recognize our territory then, because we're going to be erased by time and by fatigue from this. So I think that we need those terms, but they need to be based for us in Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous recognition of our terms, of our ways of doing, and our stories as valuable as the system that's been created around it. So I hope I've not taken too much time, but I wanted to make sure that I said it correctly.
That's great. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for the generosity of your insights. As you were speaking, I could see the medicine lines, the borders disappearing between us, through our communities, and also through the issues, as you mentioned. I think it's really important when we're having this conversation that sometimes the environmental struggle is separated from what our youth are going through with police brutality. So also as a community, as an organizing community, to remember when you're asking people to relive trauma, to talk about these issues, that there are other issues that are also connected to that struggle as well. So thank you for all of that. I'm going to pass it on to you, Molly, and I really want to hear about your insights on how you feel Ecocide could support and uplift the sovereignty struggles that you're working towards at the moment.
Thank you. As the Wet'suwet'en, we've been working on all different levels in order to protect our Yintah. And so I really want to thank Raven's been working with us to raise funds for the judicial review to challenge the project certificate for this pipeline. We have yet to hear back about a decision. It's been months and months, which is unusual, but we haven't gotten a decision yet on that. There's been many court cases, court challenges that we've been utilizing every tool that we possibly can. The problem is that the colonial justice system or injustice system isn't designed for us. It is designed for, corporations. It's designed for the colonial structure to be maintained. And so there are challenges with it that we've seen in this struggle and in our history. The Wet'suwet'en went to court in the Supreme Court in Delgamuukw Gistewe versus the Queen, and were recognized that we had never extinguished our title to our territories. We are governed by our hereditary chiefs, which is our clan governance system, which has been in place for thousands of years. And that was recognized in the Supreme Court of Canada. And yet, these tools like injunctions are being used to criminalize us. The so-called rule of law that Canada, pats itself on the back for is racist. It's absolutely racist because it does not take into account Indigenous law. It does not take into account Wet'suwet'en law. We have a very complex set of laws, the interrelated, interdependent laws that govern our people, that govern our lands. One of my jobs in the past few years was to codify our laws into a Wet'suwet'en constitution that's based on our Gidimt'en. Doesn't have anything to do with the colonial laws or the colonial system. It's all our traditional laws that come from our land, that have governed our people since time immemorial. And so colonial laws don't take into account any other law except for colonial law. And so even though we've been fighting this, like Melissa said, we've been using every tool that we possibly can, it's certainly limited. I think that it is, we do have to have an understanding of what ecocide is as Indigenous people. I also think that it is settlers' responsibility to alter the state of this colonial empire, that their own system, you know what I mean, that it's not our job to change the colonial structure alone. Like, we are so busy, like Melissa had said, we are so busy, and the work that that Chief Dana has been doing as well, and all Indigenous people, we're so busy just trying to survive in many cases, and trying to revitalize our culture and revitalize those connections to the land and revitalize our language and keep our families together and keep our children from killing themselves and like all of the things every single day. It's the colonizers' responsibility, the settler people's responsibility to take that up and change their system to be more in line with ours. And so as with Wet'suwet'en, like many of the conversations that we've had on a governance level are that, okay, well, we have this body of laws and this set of laws that we are going to implement on our territory. Like, we have trespass laws. You can't go onto another clan's territory, never mind another nation's territory, and just do whatever you want and take whatever you want. There are severe consequences for that would usually end up in death. So like, they're very, very serious. They're very complex. And so what does it look like today when we implement our laws on our territory? Then we're criminalized. We're put in jail. And that's exactly what the Wet'suwet'en are doing. And we are being criminalized for it. And so shifting that narrative and aligning international law to be just and include Indigenous law and recognition of Indigenous, sovereign Indigenous nations and the bodies of laws that we follow is a huge step in the right direction, I think. I believe that it's not our responsibility to have to do that in a system that is not ours. We have enough work to do, but I believe that settler folks should be doing that work to change those laws. And one of the reasons, we've been upholding our laws and we've had to resort to direct action on the ground in order to uphold our laws, because the injustice system does not work for us. It hasn't been working for us. In some cases, we might get small little wins, but we are having to take steps and take direct action to uphold our laws, just to be Wet'suwet'en, just to live and abide by our Gidimt'en. This is what we have had to resort to. And we certainly would rather just be living our lives. We would rather not be camped out on the side of the road in -40 for weeks and weeks while militarized RCMP plan their attack on our people and our territories. Like, this is not what we want to be doing with our lives. We have better things to do, but this is what we've had to do because the laws aren't in line with our Indigenous laws, and they don't respect our Indigenous laws. So I think that it can be very useful. I think that there has to be some way to show Canada and to show other countries internationally that they cannot act with impunity. And we did that. We had to show them, last year when the raids happened on Wet'suwet'en territory, we were showing them that they can't act with impunity. And we had to do that on the ground because there was no other options available to us. When all of the other nations stood with us and shut down Canada and crippled the economy of Canada, that was showing them that they can't act with impunity. And so any resources and any sort of tactics that we can employ and that settlers can employ themselves so that we don't have to do all the work, I think are very important tools to be looked at and can be useful to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much for laying out a pathwork, what this work looks like towards this transition of justice, towards accountability, the roles of allies, the roles of settlers, and especially we have lots of people tuning in from the UK, from colonial countries as well, to understand that there's a place that we take in that work. So I really appreciate you spelling that out for us and taking us on that journey as well. So I'm going to pass it now to Chief Dana to bring us into your insights into how you can see law of ecocide connecting with your continued implementation of Indigenous sovereignty.
Oh, where to start? First of all, I'd like to say, okay, we're going to go on a journey, guys and girls. But first of all, I'll start with, yes, international laws on ecocide are very much needed to begin some of the first inklings of harmonizing and bringing balance to colonial law. Now, but let me juxtapose this. The author Yuval Noah Harari writes that you can dissect a human cell and you will not find a declaration for human rights in it. What that comment really means is that our colonial brothers and sisters, they all work since Black's Law, 14th century and beyond. They all work on, their whole entire legal system is underpinned by what is supreme, what documents reign supreme, right? They're always looking for supremacy. What they don't understand is their context has been shrunk, and it's just purely a local human context. Indigenous peoples have recognized the laws of the land in what I call the language before words. And you can go out on the land and it doesn't matter whether you're a moose, a muskrat, or a man. All of your lessons, each one of you, are all treated the same. And nature tells us that it banks on diversity and rewards cooperation. So what brings the opposite of that? If you look to the primordial inklings of European culture, back to paganism, it was actually women who chose who the king was, even up to the 3rd dynasty in Egypt. Whom the queen married became the king. And the king was actually below the queen. Some cultures actually killing the king after about 7 years and then the next. So paganism was recognizing that women, as in my culture, were chosen by creator to co-create. So women's blood represented the universe in creation. The only way men could do that and participate was through warring and hunting. So that's where our blood came from. But it's really interesting when you have the King James version of the Bible and the Council of Nicaea saying that all of a sudden woman came from the rib of Adam, one little side, and then women began dominated. I'd love to do my own university course on this, but really this comes from empire building. Because if you want to build an empire and you're coming out of the Fertile Crescent, you need warriors to attack and defend. And to get that, you need to subjugate women and dominate them to usurp this creative process of birth making and control other humans under this class of monarch or a high priest that's above others, which is completely against the grain of natural way of life and natural thinking. And so law is one of those large tools. Same with the dogmatic approach to creation and those creation stories. So all of this to say is we really have to focus in on this backdrop of where law came from in the first place. And we have to understand that a child, as the Greeks refer to as tabula rasa, blank slate, a child is not born sexist, they are not born racist, they're not born homophobic. Those things are taught to them. Actual studies show that a child at 9 months, a baby, can understand the last of its digestive cookies and will still give its last digestive cookie to another baby. So where does Adam Smith out of Wealth of Nations get off by using the anecdote that humans are like dogs and a dog will not share its bone with another dog? What we are seeing with the perversion of natural human inclinations is to subvert our proclivities as a social creatures to be harnessed and our beings yoked through compartmentalization in societies that feed up to the upper class, to this division that does not exist between elitism. And what it breaks down to is you create a parasitic form of thought, which I call a psychokinetic disease. Now, a parasite enters an organism and gets the organism to crave the minerals and the nutrients that reward the parasite. Well, let's think of it for a second. Capitalism is not a natural principle. It is not a natural function of the universe like we practice it today. Truth does not need us to invent it. We recognize truth, and truth does not need humans to exist. Lies do. Lies depend on human beings to believe in them. So in this way, forms of this law that have been perverted, as well as the religious inklings, dogmatic practices, all of these human-born empire-building ideas are forms of parasitic thought that live through us, and through hijacking our egos, reward our egos to promote their continuance. And Indigenous philosophies are completely perpendicular, or they're completely opposed to that. That's why, as Jared Diamond in Guns, Germs, and Steel writes, that this is why the colonial bodies destroyed Indigenous peoples wherever they went. Because this heathenistic, paganistic, equalizing worldview was absolutely, capitalism cannot exist like that. So what I'm trying to say here is, yes, we do need to begin steering this big ship. And like I said, most of the change in our way forward as a species is happening in the Indigenous communities who are using renewable energies, decentralizing money systems, selling savings to stockholders and utilities by creating renewable and self-sustaining money systems in our communities. We are the ones who are taking modern technology and marrying it with Indigenous values to really ascertain what is truly valuable, not growth for growth's sake, which the Law Society usurps that and it just protects it. And as a very real example, people should look into the Rosa Parks County ruling from the 1880s in Northern California, where a judge mentioned a corporation having the rights of a person. This was ruled on in 1902, where a corporation was given the rights of a person. So quite in effect, everyone here, when you read, like, let's say in Canada, the Tax Act, and it says a taxpayer must pay taxes. Well, what does a taxpayer mean? Let's look in Black's Law. Taxpayer says a person. Oh, well, that must mean us. No, let's dig deeper. A person, quite literally in these colonial law systems, is defined as a natural person and or entity, a corporation. Look into the Bank of England and the City of London within the City of London. They used an archaic law after losing power in World War II, and they used this archaic law to opening up banking systems where it was illegal to know who the trustee was, and that's where offshore reserve banks come from, which usurps all kinds of sovereignty. So whether it comes in the philosophical principles and you can extrapolate all the way to the complexities and nuances of today, we quite literally have citizens, whether they're First Nations or not, who don't understand the law of society, who don't understand our monetary systems, who don't understand our political systems. This system is not about empowering you as a person. It is about usurping your products and the energy that you drive into a society so others can scrape off the top. So yes, we very much need to begin inserting Indigenous values into the system, because to end it, I'll just say that the law society, monetary systems, all of these are not inherently evil. They are just tools. But you have to be careful, because if we forget who we are, you quit using the tool and the tool begins using you. It was not humans that domesticated wheat in the Fertile Crescent. It was wheat that domesticated man. If you have a gun and you bring it to my people, we will show you how to use it in a self-sustaining, renewable manner. But if you simply decimate buffalo herd populations, see, either or, it's not the gun's fault. The systems that we have established in our society, they work, and they work well. The problem is that behind this tool is an unbalanced worldview. That is why our climate has become unbalanced, not because of the tools. And only when we achieve this balance in our minds will we see it reflected in this world. And I would go so far as to say, if we did establish an artificial intelligence program that could pass the Turing test and leave human fathering, I believe that this synthetic consciousness, or the synthetic form of thought, would reflect Indigenous values. And I find it so funny in a thought experiment that colonial bodies would look more to an AI program than the Indigenous peoples who are right here, who have been trying to bring these teachings since the moment we have come into interaction. I needed to get that off my chest. See,
we needed to hear it. We needed to hear it. And this is exactly what we wanted to do today. We wanted to have this space to, as well as talking about the specifics of the law, to go deep into the paradigm shift, to the renaissance, as you can say, that we need. So I want to appreciate you all. I want to thank you. This journey of being an ally, it's a lifelong journey of learning. So I appreciate in these times of pandemic when we can't meet together that we can learn together. So yeah, just heartfelt gratitude from myself for all the insights that you've brought today, and I hope we can continue this conversation, this building of international solidarity. And I'm going to pass it over to Louise to take us out, and I'm also going to just say that we'll be sharing links to how you can continue to support everyone on the Stop Ecocide page as well. So over to you, Louise.
Thank you. Wow. I just wish I had a moment of silence just to let all these stories and words land, but I'm sure they will travel with us in the next days and hours. Yeah, thank you deeply from my heart. Yes, and I guess to kind of conclude, I just wanted to emphasize what we do from Stop Ecocide in our campaign, since we have such a large audience. And I won't take much time, and then I will give the opportunity for Anna to also close this wonderful event. So I think most of you probably understood by now, but really the aim of the campaign is to create criminal liability for chief executives and government ministers while creating a legal duty of care for life on Earth. And right now, the mass damage and destruction of nature is legally permitted. Treaties, agreements, and civil lawsuits have all failed to prevent transnational corporations from plundering the Earth for its resources, which has led inevitably to the global climate and ecological crisis. And this is really why we want to make ecocide an international crime at the International Criminal Court. As you heard, criminalizing ecocide changes the ground rule by which our system operates, our communal system operates. It makes serious harm to nature legally and morally unacceptable. which has been reflected by Indigenous worldviews for a long, long time. And it prevents finance and corporate activities from continuing to destroy ecosystem. The International Criminal Court is a powerful mechanism that can hold the perpetrators to account within Western legal systems. And we are really hoping and aiming that it will give tools for Indigenous communities when those crimes occur on their territories. And I just want to remind everyone that something I learned a few years ago now, but that was really shocking to me, that just 100 fossil fuels producers are responsible for 71% of the greenhouse gases that have been released in the last 30 years. So they are all very clear targets. And yeah, I guess to end, like, we all have a part to play to contribute to systemic change. Throughout history, civil mobilizations have made a huge difference, creating a window of conversation, expanding more and more into mainstream media and the political sphere. And the more people join our movement as Earth protectors and signing our international petition, the louder we will be and the least we can be ignored. So together as Earth protectors, we can demonstrate to governments and industry that there is a public commitment behind this demand to make ecocide an international crime. And it creates grassroots backup for states willing to take forward the reoccupation of ecocide. Thank you. Over to you, Anna.
Well, heartful, so much intellectual brilliance, so much groundedness, and an ethical view that embraces the whole world. And I just don't have anything to say because I'm so appreciative and feeling so much. So thank you, everybody. And you'll hear from us in due course. There is lots to do.